What if seriousness, that virtue you were taught to cultivate as a pillar of character, were actually the most sophisticated and invisible cage your mind has ever constructed? This is not an empty provocation, but a surgical question that cuts to the very core of our modern condition. Society, in its infinite pragmatic wisdom, sells us an equation that seems unquestionable. Effort combined with seriousness results in success, respect, and ultimately, validity as a human being. We are conditioned from our earliest days at school to internalize this formula. The educational system rewards not wild curiosity, but the correct answer. It celebrates not wandering exploration, but compliance with the curriculum. Laughter is relegated to recess. Play is a luxury confined to vacations. But life, real life, as we are gravely told, is serious business. A project to be managed. This fundamental premise, rarely examined, anchors our entire psychic structure. But, as philosopher Alan Watts urges us to investigate, what if this premise isn't a pillar, but the foundation of a prison? What if all the monumental effort we invest in being taken seriously is the primary source of our existential exhaustion, our feeling of rootlessness in a world that should be our home? To understand the depth of this trap, we must first dissect the very nature of seriousness. It masquerades as responsibility, maturity, and gravity. But under the light of psychological analysis, it reveals itself as a contraction. It is a state of tension, a perpetual vigilance against error, ridicule, and chaos. Observe your own mind for a moment, like a scientist observing a bacterial culture under a microscope. Notice the constant internal narrative, this relentless judge that evaluates every action, every word, every thought. It is the obsessive planner who maps out possible futures, calculating risks and benefits, trying to transform life's unpredictability into an Excel spreadsheet. It is the merciless critic who laments every past mistake, reliving failures with masochistic clarity. This mechanism, this voice we mistake for our own, operates under the tyranny of seriousness. It convinces us that every step is decisive, that every choice can lead to glorious triumph or irreparable catastrophe. We live like a tightrope walker, muscles tensed, eyes fixed on the final destination, terrified of falling. What we forget, however, is that perhaps there is no abyss beneath us. Perhaps the rope is only inches from the ground. The pressure to get it right, to fulfill a grandiose purpose of our own invention, to leave an indelible mark on history, turns us into actors in a drama we've written. And the worst part, the most tragic twist, is that we come to believe we are the role we play. We mistake the mask, the persona, which Carl Jung so accurately described, for our true face. And what is the cost of this confusion? What price do we pay for taking this performance so seriously? The cost is a chronic, low-frequency anxiety that becomes the soundtrack of our lives. It's a persistent feeling of inadequacy, the feeling that we always fall short, always beholden to an unattainable ideal that society, and consequently our internal judge, imposes on us. This relentless search for external validation, for a seal of approval that says you're good enough, places us in a game fraudulently designed to never have a winner. Happiness, we're told, is just around the corner after graduation. Peace of mind will come with a promotion. Fulfillment, oh, that's guaranteed in retirement. Life becomes a series of obstacles to overcome, a race of barriers in the name of a future that, by definition, never arrives. Like a traveler focused only on reaching their destination, we miss the landscape, the conversation with the stranger on the road, the smell of rain on the earth, the journey itself. Alan Watts uses a powerful metaphor to describe this condition. It's like listening to a magnificent symphony, just waiting for the final note. What a tragic waste it would be to ignore all the melody, all the harmony, all the visceral emotion of the music, just to celebrate its final silence. This is exactly what we do when we treat life as a problem to be solved, an equation to be balanced. We become so obsessed with deciphering the enigma that we forget to live the experience. This mindset turns us into engineers of our own existence rather than artists. The engineer seeks efficiency, predictability, and the elimination of risk. The artist, on the other hand, embraces mystery, chance, and the beauty that emerges from the unexpected. By living as engineers, we build secure, stable, but often sterile lives. The walls we erect to protect ourselves from chaos also isolate us from vitality. Our fear of the unknown leads us to prefer the familiarity of a cell to the vastness of the open sky. And herein lies the central question that haunts us. If all this seriousness is a trap, a gilded cage that we ourselves polish and decorate with diplomas and titles, why do we cling to it so tightly, as if our lives depended on it? The answer, like an echo from the depths of existential philosophy, is more disturbing than we imagine. We don't cling to seriousness out of a love of responsibility or order. We cling to it out of fear. A fear far deeper and more paralyzing than the fear of failure or poverty. It's the terrifying fear of freedom. The freedom to be the sole authors of our own meaning, without a pre-approved script to guide us. The weight of seriousness, however overwhelming, seems preferable to the vertigo of being radically, unconditionally free. This is the Faustian pact our culture encourages us to make. We trade soul for security. We exchange the infinite possibility of the present moment for the finite promise of a controlled future. Seriousness is the seal of this contract. It gives us the illusion that we are in control, that the universe is an ordered system that can be understood and manipulated if we are diligent enough. Yet this quest for control is precisely what imprisons us. It's the attempt to hold water with our clenched fists. The more force we apply, the more it slips through our fingers. True mastery, as sages from all traditions remind us, lies not in control, but in the harmonious dance with the uncontrollable. But to dance, you must first let go, and it is this act of letting go that terrifies us. Seriousness then becomes our handrail, our anchor in a sea of uncertainty. We prefer the familiar complaint of a weight on our shoulders to the anxiety of being weightless, of floating aimlessly in a cosmos that offers us no guarantees. And it is this often unconscious choice that sets the stage for the silent tragedy of a life not lived to its fullest. A choice we reaffirm every moment we choose the map over the territory, the security of the known over the terrifying promise of the real. It is a continual renunciation, a daily sacrifice on the altar of predictability, where the victim is our own vibrant and untamed soul. This fear of freedom is not an abstraction confined to philosophy books. It is the invisible force that shapes the architecture of our daily lives, manifesting itself in the small theaters of everyday life, where we enact, with almost religious dedication, our drama of seriousness. Think of the college student, hunched over books until dawn. Society applauds their sacrifice, their seriousness. But if we look more closely, what really motivates them? Often, it's not a genuine passion for knowledge, the incandescent curiosity that leads to discovery. It's fear. The fear of not getting the diploma, of not finding a good job, of not living up to the expectations of their parents and teachers. Their goal is not wisdom, but the grade, the symbol of approval. Seriousness about the result drains the process of its meaning, transforming learning, which should be an act of expansion, into an exercise in conformity. They memorize facts to pass the test, but unlearn the much more vital art of questioning, of doubting, of wonder. Now, fast forward a few years, and find this same individual in the corporate world. He's become the exemplary professional who sacrifices his health, his family time, and his hobbies to climb the ladder. He plays the game with impeccable seriousness, following all the unwritten rules of power, driven by the promise of security, status, and recognition. He confuses the map of success with the territory of happiness. Decades later, sitting in his office with a panoramic view, he gazes at the horizon and wonders why he feels so empty, so disconnected. He won the game, but in the process, he lost touch with the player. with the vibrant, multidimensional person behind the title. He no longer has a life. He's become his resume. The same subtle and poisonous dynamic poisons our most intimate relationships. How many of us enter relationships and friendships trying to be the perfect partner, the perfect mother, the perfect friend? We adopt an invisible script, woven from the expectations of society, romantic movies, and social media. We repress our inadequate feelings, anger, envy, boredom. We hide our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, our desires we consider selfish. All of this to maintain the performance of an ideal of love or friendship. The effort to sustain this image is monumental, a constant drain on our psychic energy. And, in the cruelest of ironies, it is precisely this effort, this seriousness in playing a role, that creates the distance and inauthenticity that prevent the real, deep connection we so desire. Seriousness with the role prevents us from simply being human, fallible, contradictory, messy, in the presence of another. In each of these scenarios, from student to professional to lover, the person is operating under the same fundamental limiting belief: that life is a technical problem that can be solved with the right algorithm. We believe that if we follow the steps, if we try hard enough, if we are serious enough, we will inevitably crack the code, and the prize of happiness will be handed to us. What we fail to realize, and here Alan Watts's analysis becomes cutting, is that this search for an instruction manual for life is, in itself, the problem. It is a futile attempt to control the uncontrollable, to impose a geometric order on a reality that is, by nature, organic and wild. Life is not an engineering project. It is an improvised work of art. It is not linear. It does not follow a narrative of constant progress. It is cyclical, chaotic, a dance of opposites, light and shadow, joy and pain, creation and destruction. This is where Eastern wisdom, which Watts studied extensively, offers a radical contrast. He invites us to observe nature. Does it operate with our logic of purpose and efficiency? A cloud does not float to reach a specific destination. It is moved by the wind, in a dance, without destination. A bird does not sing to fulfill a goal of producing melodies. It sings because song is the expression of its nature. A flower does not bloom to be admired. It blooms. Period. Our Western mind, trained for utility, rejects this apparent uselessness. We need a why, a justification for every act. And in the absence of a cosmic answer, we invent it. We create purposes, goals, narratives of personal and collective progress. But this invention, this fiction that gives us a precarious sense of control, has a devastating side effect. It alienates us from the flow of reality. We begin to live in a world of concepts, of abstractions. We live on the map, not in the territory. And then we wonder why life seems so colorless, so flavorless, so distant. The answer is simple and brutal. We are trying to eat the menu instead of tasting the food. And seriousness is the waiter who insists that the menu is the only thing that matters. This waiter serves us symbols instead of substance. He convinces us that the money in the bank account is happiness, not the freedom and experience it can provide. He tells us that the diploma on the wall is wisdom, not the process of discovery that led to it. We live in a second-hand world, negotiating representations of reality, while the true, vibrant, pulsating reality passes us by unnoticed. It's the root of that modern feeling of unreality, of watching our own lives on a screen, like passive spectators. We collect the checklist items of a successful life, the marriage, the house, the car, the trips, and yet we feel a hunger we can't name. It's the soul's hunger for direct experience, unmediated by concepts. It's the thirst for reality. Seriousness promises us control over life, but what it delivers is perfect control over a pale imitation. We live in a copy so well crafted that we forget the original exists. And the tragedy is that the original is always here, now, available in the taste of coffee, the feel of the sun on our skin, the sound of someone we love's laughter. But we're too busy studying the menu, planning our next meal, to notice the feast already spread before us. Questioning the authority of this serious waiter is therefore not an act of frivolity, but the first and most crucial step in reclaiming our lost inheritance, life itself in its untamed fullness. At this point in our investigation, Alan Watts's wisdom finds a deep and resonant echo in Carl Jung's analytical psychology. What Watts poetically describes as the burden of seriousness, Jung would diagnose with a clinician's precision as a total and unconscious identification with the persona. The persona, in Jungian terms, is the social mask that all of us, without exception, wear. It is our public identity, the carefully curated version of ourselves that we present to the world to be accepted, to be loved, to fit into social structures. It is an absolutely necessary tool for coexistence, a kind of diplomatic interface between our vast and chaotic inner world and the demands of the outside world. The problem, and herein lies the core of much neurotic suffering, is not having a persona. The problem arises, as Jung tirelessly warned, when we forget we are wearing a mask. It occurs when the actor, after years of playing the same role, becomes convinced that he is the king he represents on stage. It is at this precise point that life becomes heavy, rigid, defensive, and ultimately deadly serious. Why? Because, from that moment on, all our psychic energy, all our libido, is consumed in maintaining and defending this artificial and fragile identity. Everything that doesn't fit the idealized image of the mask, our irrational fears, our primitive rages, our socially unacceptable passions, our chaotic and disruptive creativity, is violently repressed. And where does all this rejected psychic material go? It's thrown into the shadow, the dark, dank basement of our psyche. The shadow becomes the repository of everything we deny within ourselves. And the law of psychic economy is relentless. The more serious, perfect, and one-sided our persona, the larger, darker, and more dangerous our shadow becomes. This internal struggle, this civil war waged deep within our souls, is the true source of our pervasive anxiety. It is the Herculean and exhausting effort of maintaining a facade of order and control, while a volcano of chaos and repressed authenticity bubbles just below the surface. Watts's proposal to not take life so seriously is, therefore, much more than advice to relax. It is a psychologically radical invitation. It's a call to what Jung would call the process of individuation, recognizing the mask for what it is, a useful but partial tool, not our wholeness. It's a call to have the courage to descend into the basement and confront what we hide there. Play, in Watts's profound context, doesn't mean being frivolous, childish, or irresponsible. Quite the opposite. It means having the mature courage to experiment, to be spontaneous, to allow the parts of yourself that don't fit the official script to surface, even if it's uncomfortable. It's the terrifying yet immensely liberating act of occasionally letting the mask slip. It's allowing yourself to be vulnerable, contradictory, incomplete. And this leads us to an inevitable and uncomfortable question. What is the real cost of keeping this mask intact 24/7? The cost is our vitality. Energy spent repressing is energy that isn't available for life, for creativity, for love. The cost is our authenticity. We live in constant fear of being found out, that someone will see the cracks in our armor of seriousness and realize that, deep down, we're not so sure of anything. The great cosmic joke, as Watts and Jung, each in their own way, love to point out, is that no one has it. We are all improvising in this vast and mysterious theater of existence. Seriousness is the disguise we use to hide this fundamental and liberating truth from each other, and especially from ourselves. But what would happen if we stopped defending ourselves against an accusation no one is making? What if vulnerability weren't a weakness to be hidden, but the only gateway to real connection and the discovery of who we truly are beyond the facade? Seriousness promises us security, but delivers a well-guarded solitude. Play, on the other hand, exposes us to risk, but offers the possibility of true communion and wholeness. This risk is the true gateway to maturity. Not the staid maturity of the businessman who represses his emotions, but the maturity of the wise man who has learned to dance with chaos. The risk is not just appearing foolish in the eyes of others, but the much deeper risk of disintegrating the identity we have spent a lifetime building. It is the fear that, when we drop the mask, we will find nothing beneath. Or, worse, find the monster we always feared we were. The security of the persona is the security of a script. We know our lines, we know our role, we understand the expectations. It is a predictable life, but it is a life in captivity. When life inevitably hits us with a crisis, a loss, an illness, a layoff, the mask shatters. And if we have not cultivated a relationship with our wholeness, with our shadow, what emerges is not resilient strength, but uncontrolled panic. The shadow, having been so violently repressed, erupts destructively, sabotaging us precisely when we need integrity most. True security, therefore, lies not in the rigidity of the mask, but in the flexibility of those who know they are more than it. It lies in the ability to transition between the seriousness required to fill out a tax return and the ability to laugh at oneself 5 minutes later. This fluidity is the mark of a healthy psyche. The communion that vulnerability offers is equally profound. The connection based on personas is fragile, a tacit agreement between two facades. True intimacy is born when two people have the courage to show their shadows to each other, and instead of recoiling in horror, recognize the shared humanity in that imperfection. It is the moment when the confession of a weakness is met not with judgment, but with a "me too." In that instant, existential loneliness dissipates, not because we have found someone perfect, but because we have been perfectly seen in our imperfection. The realization that we are all improvising, that seriousness is a collective armor against uncertainty, leads us to an even more dizzying and liberating truth. Our obsession with control, purpose, and seriousness is not just an individual psychological error. It is a fundamental misperception about the very nature of reality. Western science, in its relentless search for laws and certainties, stumbled, almost by accident, into a universe far stranger and more playful than its founders ever imagined. 20th century physics, especially quantum mechanics, demolished the foundations of Newton's predictable mechanical world. We discovered that, at the most fundamental level, particles do not exist in a fixed, determined state until observed. They exist in a field of potentialities, a soup of probabilities. It is the act of measuring, of interacting, of observing in a certain way, that forces them to choose a state, to collapse the wave function. Similarly, when we view life through the lens of rigid seriousness, focused on problems and outcomes, we force it to manifest as a problem. We freeze the vibrant flow of possibilities into a harsh, utilitarian, and often disappointing reality. The universe, however, at its core, seems to have a much more musical and playful nature. The great mystical and philosophical traditions of the East captured this intuition millennia ago. In Hinduism, the concept of Lila describes the entire cosmos as a divine play, a spontaneous, purposeless dance of the universal consciousness, Shiva. The universe is not going anywhere, not trying to achieve a goal. It is expressing itself, unfolding, marveling at itself moment by moment, out of pure, creative joy. Modern neuroscience, without intending to validate ancient sacred texts, is beginning to map the brain mechanisms behind our prison of seriousness. A complex network of brain areas called the default mode network has been identified. This network becomes more active when we are not engaged in a specific task, when our mind is wandering. And what does this network do? It tells stories about the self. It obsessively ruminates on the past. I should have said that. Anxiously plans for the future. I need to do this to get that. And above all, it constructs and maintains a cohesive and continuous narrative about our identity. It is the neurological headquarters of our ego, the official speaker of our personal drama. This incessant chatter, which most of us mistake for the act of thinking itself, is the soundtrack to our seriousness. It keeps us chained to the story of me, with all its problems, ambitions, resentments, and fears. However, contemplative practices like meditation or states of deep absorption, what psychologists call flow, whether in nature, art, or a job we love, can temporarily deactivate this network. And what emerges from this mental silence? A direct, raw perception of reality, unfiltered by the egoic narrator. The world appears as it is, vibrant, interconnected, intensely present. In this state, there are no problems to be solved, only the experience to be lived. It's fascinating to observe how different cultures throughout history have developed technologies of consciousness to bring about this same shift in perception. Taoist philosophers in ancient China spoke of Wu Wei, effortless action. Wu Wei is not passivity or laziness, but a form of action that flows in perfect harmony with the natural course of things, like a surfer harnessing the energy of the wave rather than fighting it. Its effectiveness that comes from surrender, not control. Zen masters in Japan, for their part, used koans, paradoxical and illogical riddles like, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" to disrupt the rational, serious mind of the disciple. A koan is not a problem to be solved logically. It is a tool to short-circuit the problem-solving mechanism and force the mind into a state of direct, non-conceptual perception. What all these traditions, and now, surprisingly, even cutting-edge science are telling us is that our serious, objective, and realistic view of the world is actually a consensual hallucination. It's a version of reality that has been heavily edited and censored by our ego, which fears, above all, losing the illusion of control. Alan Watts's radically simple proposal is, in essence, an invitation to stop believing our own fake news. It's an invitation to peek behind the curtain of our own mental theater and discover the magnificent dance that has always been happening. This discovery, however, requires an ingredient that our pragmatic and controlling culture has taught us to devalue and fear: trust. Not trust in a specific outcome, but trust in the process of life itself. Seriousness is, at its root, a symptom of a deep distrust. We distrust the world, so we try to map and control it. We distrust ourselves, our instincts, our emotions, so we impose rigid discipline and a purposeful narrative to keep our inner chaos under control. The result is a state of perpetual war against our own nature and the nature of the universe. The alternative Watts proposes is not chaos, but a higher form of order. The spontaneous order we see in an ecosystem, a school of fish, or a galaxy. These systems are not managed by a central controller. They are self-organizing, a complex dance of feedback and cooperation that emerges from simple rules and the inherent intelligence of the whole. Participating in this cosmic dance requires us to relax our desire to be the orchestra's conductor. It requires us to stop trying to force the note and start listening to the music that is already playing. This shift in posture, from control to trust, from effort to attunement, is perhaps the most profound transformation a human being can experience. It is not a new strategy for winning the game of life. It's the liberating realization that life isn't a game to be won, but a dance to be danced. And the only way to truly dance is to let yourself go completely with the rhythm. The journey has taken us from the invisible currents of seriousness, past the masks we wear in society, to the dizzying realization that the universe dances without a utilitarian purpose. Now, we arrive at the core of the paradox, the main actor in this existential drama, the self. This entity we so strenuously defend, which we try to polish, promote, and protect, is the epicenter of our seriousness. To dismantle the tyranny of effort, we need to look directly at the tyrant. And what do we find when we do so? The most disconcerting and, at the same time, most liberating discovery that human consciousness can achieve. The self, or the ego as we know it, is not a solid, continuous thing, like a stone we carry within us. It is, as Alan Watts so brilliantly described, a process, an activity, a vibratory pattern. The perfect metaphor is that of a whirlpool in a river. The whirlpool has a recognizable shape, a momentary identity. We can point to it and say, there is a whirlpool. But if we try to catch it, if we dip a bucket into the river to capture it, what do we get? Just water. The whirlpool is not a separate entity from the river, it is something the river is doing. Likewise, your self is not an isolated soul, a little man inside your head piloting the machine of your body. The self is something the entire universe is creating here and now, through this specific organism. It is a complex pattern of memories, conditioning, beliefs, and sensations, a temporary node in the vast web of existence. The seriousness with which we cling to this identity is comparable to the seriousness of a whirlpool desperately trying to maintain its exact shape, fearing with every passing second that it will be dissolved back into the river's flow. This insight is not just a poetic abstraction. It has profound psychological implications. Much of our suffering, our anxiety, our envy, our fear of death stems from the need to protect and perpetuate this fictional identity. We live as if we were the protagonist of an epic film, where every twist, every criticism, and every failure is taken personally, like a direct attack on our essence. When a theater actor plays a king, they can completely surrender to the performance, feeling the character's passion, rage, and power. But a good actor never forgets they are acting. At the end of the play, they take off their crown, remove their makeup, and return to their normal life. They don't take the tragedies of the stage home with them. We, on the other hand, have become existential method actors. We become so immersed in our role, the role of good professional, dedicated mother, intelligent person, or even failure, that we forget that the curtain will one day fall. We mistake the mask for our true face. The radical proposal here is to become a good actor in life. This doesn't mean being fake or inauthentic. On the contrary, it means having the freedom to play our various social roles with total commitment and passion, but without the paralyzing anxiety of believing that these roles represent the totality of our being. It means understanding that our successes and failures are events in the play, not final judgments on our soul. Disidentification with the ego does not lead to nihilism or passivity, as many fear. It leads to a much more powerful and intelligent form of action. When we no longer expend immense amounts of psychological energy defending a fragile image, this energy becomes available to live more fully and effectively. A wave in the ocean doesn't worry about failing when it breaks on the shore. It's its nature. It's what waves do. It's part of the ocean's rhythm. Likewise, when we see ourselves as an expression of the universe rather than an isolated ego, our mistakes become part of the dance, learning opportunities, not verdicts on our worth. This shift in perspective is what allows for true spontaneity. One cannot try to be spontaneous, for the effort itself already belongs to the domain of the controlling ego. Spontaneity arises when we relax control, when we stop constantly self-observing and judging ourselves. This is what happens in moments of deep absorption, when music, a landscape, or a conversation captivate us to the point that we forget ourselves. In these moments, the I disappears, and what remains is only pure experience. Watts's invitation is to recognize that these moments are not rare exceptions, but glimpses of our true nature. The fundamental question that emerges from this analysis is, if I am not the whirlpool, but the river, what does this mean in practice? It means that the need to be right, to win an argument, to prove our worth, loses its urgency. The need to control others and circumstances to fit our personal story reveals itself to be a futile and exhausting endeavor. Instead, the ability to respond to life as it presents itself emerges, with flexibility and grace, like water that flows around obstacles without losing its nature. Seriousness is rigid, playfulness is fluid. The ego is fragile, consciousness is resilient. By releasing our identification with the temporary pattern of the whirlwind, we do not become nothing. On the contrary, we discover that we are everything. We discover a strength that does not depend on our achievements. and a peace that does not depend on our circumstances. This is the turning point, the final act of the ego's drama, where the protagonist finally realizes that he is not just a character, but the author, the stage, and the entire play. And this revelation is not a tragedy. It is divine comedy at its most sublime. This divine comedy refers not to hysterical laughter in the face of absurdity, but to a profound sense of peace that comes with accepting the cosmic play. It is the serene smile of someone who has understood that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Living from this realization fundamentally changes the texture of daily experience. Mundane tasks, once seen as obligations on the path to a greater goal, become part of the dance itself. Washing the dishes, once a chore to be quickly completed, can become a meditation on water, form, and presence. Work, once a battlefield to prove one's worth, becomes an opportunity to express creativity and skill for the simple joy of expression. The opposite of this is the tragedy of the ego, which lives in a state of perpetual war. The ego is always fighting for recognition, fighting against circumstances, fighting against its own perceived flaws. It transforms life into a series of problems demanding urgent solutions, and each solution only opens the door to the next problem. It's a game that cannot be won, for its very premise is separation and conflict. True liberation, therefore, is not achieving a state of egoic perfection, but abandoning the war itself. It's laying down our weapons, not in defeat, but in wisdom. It's recognizing that the enemy we fought was a shadow cast by ourselves. And, in the silence that follows the battle, we can finally hear the music that has always been playing. The music of existence, which demands nothing of us except that we stop fighting it, and, finally, allow ourselves to dance. We've reached the end of our research, but in reality, we're only at the beginning. We've traversed the labyrinth of the human psyche, unmasked the tyranny of seriousness, and confronted the illusion of the ego. Now, the question that hangs in the air is not, what have we learned, but how will we live from here? Alan Watts's philosophy, filtered through psychological analysis, doesn't offer us a map with a final destination, but a compass that points to the present. The practical application of this knowledge isn't a 10-step formula for happiness or a method for optimizing your performance. That would be a betrayal of everything we've discussed. True application is, paradoxically, a non-application. It's the subtle art of stopping trying to fix yourself. It's the courage to abandon the most exhausting project of all, the project of becoming someone. The first step, and perhaps the only one, is to cultivate awareness of the futile effort in your daily life. Notice the tension in your shoulders when you're stuck in traffic, the anxious rush with which you devour a meal while already planning your next task, the compulsive need to fill every moment of silence with noise, whether it's a podcast, a song, or your own frantic thoughts. Don't try to change any of it. Just observe. This disarming observation is the beginning of liberation. It's like finally noticing the static on a radio that's been playing quietly your whole life. Once you hear it, you can't ignore it. The invitation is for you to introduce small acts of sacred uselessness into your routine. Go for a walk without a destination, not to burn calories or reach a step goal, but just to feel the ground beneath your feet and the air on your face. Sit for 5 minutes and simply look out the window without trying to meditate or clear your mind. Just observe the movement of the clouds, the leaves, the people. Allow yourself to do something for the simple pleasure of the act itself, not for the result. It could be drawing without the intention of creating a work of art, playing a musical instrument without missing a note, or simply lying on the grass, staring at the sky. Initially, this may seem unbearably boring or even stressful. Your mind, addicted to purpose, will scream for productivity. It will tell you that you are wasting time. And it is precisely in this moment of discomfort that magic happens. By resisting the urge to do something useful, you are, in effect, weakening the controlling ego muscle. You're teaching your nervous system that it's okay to simply exist, without having to justify that existence every second. Every time you choose presence over planning, sensation over analysis, you're staging a micro-rebellion against the dictatorship of seriousness. It's not about abandoning your responsibilities or becoming a hermit. Rather, it's about bringing a new quality of presence to everything you already do. Your work, your relationships, your duties, all can transform. Instead of being rungs on a ladder to an idealized future, they become the dance itself. The question stops being, "What will I get out of this?" and becomes, "Who am I while I'm doing this?" The essence of this journey is the transition from a life lived as a problem to be solved to a life felt as a song to be enjoyed. A song has tension and resolution, moments of silence and crescendos of intensity, but its purpose is not in the final note. The purpose is in the entire experience of listening to it. Living playfully is not about always being happy or laughing. It is embracing the totality of human experience, joy and sadness, success and failure, with the same openness as a good actor who surrenders to their role, knowing the play is bigger than themselves. It is crying with a broken heart, but without the extra layer of suffering that says, "This shouldn't be happening to me." It is celebrating a victory with gratitude, without the anxious attachment that fears losing it. This is the ultimate freedom. Not freedom from life's circumstances, but freedom within of life's circumstances. It's the peace that comes not from the absence of problems, but from the absence of the belief that life shouldn't have problems. It's a subtle shift, but one that changes everything. It's the difference between swimming against the current and learning to float. And to learn to float, the first and most important lesson is to stop struggling. It's trusting the water, trusting the process, trusting that the universe, which dances the galaxies and breathes the tides, also knows how to breathe through you. The path to this confidence is not built with more effort, but with less. It is a path of unlearning, of letting go. Every time you catch yourself taking yourself too seriously, caught up in worries about your image or your future, you can simply smile. Not a smile of disdain, but a smile of recognition, like someone reuniting with an old, predictable friend. "Ah, there he is again," you might think, "the drama of my little self." This simple act of recognition, without judgment, creates a space, and in that space, lightness can enter. This practice does not promise a destination where all problems disappear. It offers something far more valuable: the realization that, perhaps, the biggest problem has always been our relentless search for a solution. By abandoning this search, we don't find an answer, but we become the answer itself. We become the dance, the music, the game. And we discover that the seriousness with which we treated life was the only thing preventing us from living it fully. The secret, after all, was not hidden in any complex philosophy, but in the simple and radical act of finally allowing oneself to be here. If this research resonated with you, if this message awakened something, your participation is the natural continuation of this dance. Leave a comment below, even if anonymous, sharing a reflection or a moment when seriousness weighed on you. Every shared story enriches our collective journey. Like the video so this message can reach other minds who need it. And, of course, subscribe to Psychosophia so we can continue unraveling the paradoxes of the human condition together. Your presence here is proof that the search for depth is more alive than ever. And for that, my gratitude is immense.